This is my version of a box joint jig. It's made out of 3/4 inch plywood. There's a threaded bar from one end of the jig to the other. It's a 3/8 inch bar. There's a 3/8 inch nut right here that I'll show more details in a minute, but it is what forces the slider part right here. This is the slider part to move when you turn this crank handle. So each turn of the crank handle causes the slider to move a 1/16 of an inch either this way or this way. Here's a closer look at the crank handle side of the jig. So yeah, you turn it one turn, that's a 1/16 of an inch that the slider moved. Move it again, 1/16 of an inch. You can move it backwards in the other direction, 1/16 of an inch each time. So this is the other side of the jig, and this is an idea that I got off of another box joint jig on YouTube. What it is it's a circle disc right here of 3/4 inch plywood and a bar right here, and the bar mounts to this bracket right here with a bolt. So the bar itself moves this direction, and there's a spring. So you can see it right there, actually, spring. And when you crank the slider to move, and this thing will rotate, but you can kind of see how, hey, there's a notch cut right here in that disc. So each time you rotate it around, you'll get that feedback that, hey, that it wants to stop right in this position. So it's a way that you can precisely stop the crank handle each turn around, right? So you're not off a little bit, which will, make the slider be, off just a little bit. So it's really important to kind of stop it precisely in the same location each time. Okay, this is the slider part right here, and like I was showing earlier, this is a 3/8 inch nut right here. It's welded to a metal bracket. This is just a strong tie bracket. It's super cheap. I just kind of cut off the ends of the little hook ends of the strong tie, drilled 4 holes for screws, and again welded the nut to the bracket. Okay, so yeah, the bracket screws down to this 3/4 inch plywood, and that has 4 drywall screws that secure the bracket, the 3/4 inch plywood bracket, to the slider itself. This is not glued to the slider, so that you just undo these 4 screws, and then you can lift this whole slider part out. The slider is made up of 3 pieces that are bolted together with 4 bolts that are shown right here. Show another view of the slider right here. Zoom in a little bit. So yeah, there's 2 long pieces of plywood on each side and a thin piece right here. And the slider just rests on top of this guide part right here. And that goes from one end of the jig to the other. And so yeah, the slider just moves on top of this guide piece. This is the front side of the slider. This is that other long part that I mentioned before of the slider, which also rests on this 1 inch tall piece of sacrificial material. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. You can see right here the ends of the 4 bolts that hold this slider piece together. They're kind of recessed in there. You don't want those sticking out. And there's also 2 bolts sticking out this way, and those guys are for a clamp piece. This guy right here. I'll show this more in detail, but this just fits over those 2 bolts and allows you to clamp the wood piece in place. There's another feature right over here that I want to talk a little bit more. I'm going to zoom in on that. Okay, so that piece is a piece of thin oak material. It's just screwed down with 3 screws. There's no glue. I had to drill a hole through here for the bolt also. But the thing with that is say this is your material that you want to make a box joint on. So the important part here is that piece be flush with the bottom surface of the jig, right? And then it also needs to be perpendicular to that surface, right? So you want to have perpendicular box joint cuts, right? So if I've set this oak piece up so it's perpendicular, straight up and down, and kind of drilled it in place. So if I just bring this piece in and butt it right up against that oak part, and then I butt it up against flush with the bottom of the jig, well, now it's perfectly aligned, and then I can take this piece here, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, show you a little bit better here. I can take this clamp part, put it on there, and they got these nut handles, which are pretty cool, that allow it, make it real quick to kind of clamp the material down. This other side on there also. Kind of show you this other side. I want to show something over here. So on this side here, so we've got our material over on this side. We also want to have a piece of material, whatever it is, similar thickness over here on this side, just to keep the clamp straight. You know, you don't want to have to kind of clamp this on this side with no material in there, because it can actually tilt the clamp and cause some problems over here with the piece that you're actually wanting to cut. So yeah, so you push it up against that oak part right there. That keeps it perfectly straight up and down, and you keep it flush with the bottom of the jig, and now it's perfectly aligned. And you usually want to have some force down on that piece as you're kind of tightening it up. Keep it real, not a whole lot of force, but just keeping it real flush with it. One other thing you can do with this design is you can actually cut multiple pieces of material at the same time. So I'm going to cut both of these halves of the box joint at the same time right there. The key to that is that you've got, you know, this second piece that you add right here. It's got to be in the same position as the first piece. You know, these pieces are exactly 3 inches long, and my blade is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to have multiples of 1/4 inch, right? So it's going to, for each inch, you know, there'll be, I'll take material, leave material, take material, leave material. And so I'll start by taking material, and I'll end by leaving material. And it'll be the same for this piece, but if I flip this piece around, well, now I'm leaving material, but I'm taking material, so it should come together. But again, you have to make sure that this piece is flush with the bottom of the jig, and it's flush with this piece here, which is also flush with this oak piece right here, this oak alignment piece, so you get them straight up and down. And of course, you know, if I'm going to put 2 pieces on that end, I've got to put 2 pieces on this end as well, so to keep it clamped down. A couple things here are that there's of course the strips of wood down at the bottom of the jig that ride in the guides of the table saw, both sides. You know, so you want to make these guys just about as tight as you can, but yet still allow the jig to move freely back and forth. Okay, something important about the blade. Whatever blade you're going to use, it has to be exactly 1/16 of an inch increments. So whether it's a 1/16 inch wide blade or a 1/4 inch wide blade dado or a 1/2 inch dado, it has to be exactly at 1/16 of an inch intervals. And you'll need a caliper to measure this to make it exactly. That's essential to have tight fitting joints. Okay, so this is a view of the blade and the material that you want to make the box joint in. And so this is just setting the height of the blade. You want to take the one of the blade teeth and have it be as high as it can be, you know, basically right in the middle, right there, and you raise it up so that the blade is just barely above, just a small amount above the top surface of the wood, almost flush, but just barely above it. Okay, one of the other features on this side of the jig is that you can loosen up this nut knob right here, and just kind of release this disc right here from being locked in place. You can also use a wrench because there's a nut on the other side of this, kind of holding this disc in place, right? So once that's loose, though, now I can go on the other side of the jig with the crank handle, and I can spin it, but this disc won't move, right? So the position, or I can kind of set the position where the slider will be locked in place, and just in dimensions that are smaller than 1/16 of an inch. That's what you're going to find, is that when you get your wood in there, or at least the first time you install the blade that you're going to use, whether it's 1/4 inch or 1/16 of an inch, you're going to have to do some sort of micro adjustments to get the slider to be in just the right position. And I'll show more about that in a minute, but I'm just going to show what it does when you crank the handle on the other side. So you can kind of see, hopefully you can see that the slider is moving, but this disc right here is in the same place. So I can move it back and forth either way and get those micro adjustments that I need. Once I get it in just the right position, I can take my wrench and hand tighten that nut knob down. So you have to kind of keep the wrench in the right spot, and then tighten that down. Okay, so that's how you can get some micro adjustments. Okay, so I've got the height of the blade set to what I need. I've got the piece of material that I'm gonna do the box joint on in place. It's clamped down. It's flush up against this oak strip right here. And now I just need to make sure that this end, the outside end of this blade, is flush with this surface of the wood that we want to cut. So it basically needs to just touch, but not enough to actually move the blade. So the closer you can get to it without touching it, that's what you want. So the way I do that is, I'm going to rest this camera down here, is so you can see the view. As I'm sliding this forward, okay, you can see there that the blade is not touching the material. This material right here, it's not touching it. Right. Well, I could move that. I could move the crank and move it forward a turn, right, and then try it. But you can see right there, it's not letting me move it forward, right? It is hitting, right? So I need to do some sort of micro adjustment, that's in between the 1/16 of an inch. So I back it off, okay, and then I will I'll go, and on the other side of the jig, that stuff that I showed you about doing a micro adjustment, I'll loosen this up on this side, loosen the disc side up, and then I'll crank the handle now. So it's going to move the slider, but it's not going to move the locking position over on the left-hand side. So there, I think I got it close to what we need, right? Okay, there it's very close. I'm going to move it just a little bit more. I want to see just a little bit of engagement with the blade. Now you only have to do this step once. That's the good thing. Once for each thickness of blade that you have. Right there, I can feel like, okay, there you go. There, it made some contact right there. Okay. So I could probably back it off just a little bit from there. Okay, so that's it. So now I'll go back over here on this side over here to this side, and you can kind of see that, hey, this disc is in place. It's the notch side is right up against this bar right here. All I need to do is I need to tighten up this right here. I need to keep this disc in the proper location. So we just tighten this guy up. You want it to be fairly tight too, so that it, tight enough so it doesn't move when you're actually doing the cutting. Okay, so I want to mention a limitation with this type of box joint jig. So here's the crank handle here, and each turn is a 1/16 of an inch, right? And that's no problem with that. It's actually really precise. Each turn is a 1/16 of an inch exactly, or very close to being exact. The issue is that if you want to reverse the direction, and say you finished with one piece and you're ready to add another piece and then start cutting the box jig in the reverse direction, this is the limitation right here. As you can kind of see right there, the bar is moving, but the nut that's attached to the bar, that nut has a certain amount of slop to it, and so the nut isn't engaging until right about there. So this whole distance right here, almost a quarter of a turn, is just free play in the nut. So you got to be really careful about that. So if you want to switch directions, you have to flip it all the way around, if you flip it all the way around, now when you start to move it again, the nut is immediately starting to move. Okay, so this is after cutting the box joint out. It looks pretty good. It was a pretty tight fit. In some cases you kind of want that. I'm just going to hit it with tap it in with a hammer a little bit, see if I can get it fully seated. I'm just going to use a piece of scrap wood and just kind of tap it a couple of times in each orientation. So we can get it fully seated. Alright, that's looking really good actually. No gaps. That's very close right here. Nothing that just a little touch up of sanding can't smooth that out. This is cedar, so looking at this, I see some defects, some rip out right there. That was another thing I wanted to mention, was you could put a sacrificial piece on the kind of the front side of your material, and probably prevent some of this rip out that you see with this kind of wood. Other kinds of wood, maybe you don't need a sacrificial strip. I see some rip out on the ends right there a little bit also. But if I hit this with some sandpaper real quick, I think it'll smooth right out. Okay, that looks square. That right there is square. Almost perfect. I'm just going to hit it with some 60 grit sandpaper real quick. See what that does. A couple seconds here. I don't even really need to glue it right. It's a pretty tight fit. I don't think it's tight enough that you won't get any glue in there, but it is a pretty tight fit. Yeah, that's looking real good, actually. Not sure how well it's going to show up on the camera. Needs a little bit more sanding, but yeah, looks really good.